Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast, part of the Bleav Network. And joining me to preview the Texans-Packers game is Kevin Holden, an old friend of mine who's not only covered the Packers for the last 15 years as the sports director for the CBS in Milwaukee, but who also spent a couple of years covering the expansion Texans at the old News 24 in Houston. Great to see you, Kevin. And any fun memories of those early Texans?
Robert, thanks for having me on, man. Yeah, they're great memories, all stops along the way. But those years covering those Texans when they were a fledgling franchise, a couple of things really stand out to me. I actually got the job in Houston right before the first game in franchise history. So I hadn't started. I was still at my previous station in Mississippi at that time. But I'm watching the Texans knowing that this job is going to happen. And I'm watching the first game in franchise history, which of course is, a story that anyone that watches from that time can remember, that the terrific memories of week one in 2002, and thinking to myself, man, I'm headed there. I'm going to be a part of this. I'm going to be, covering this and watching this happen from the ground up. So that was one. The other really fun memory was the first full training camp that we did would have been 2003. So you're talking about David Carr in his second year then as the Texans starting quarterback. So something happened during training camp that was super funny. We would do live reports from training camp. It would happen all the time, right? This was, you lived it for a good 5 weeks. And this was right in the middle of that time. So they had just finished a practice. They wanted us live. And I'm delivering a live report talking about what's happening there, that day in practice. And they, say, all right, well, here's what Coach Dom Capers had to say about whatever. So they run the soundbite. And right as they run the soundbite, David Carr walks behind me. And you know this as well as anybody. There two things happen to you in a situation like that. You're on live television. You're about to be back on. And David Carr's walking by you. There is an instinct inside you that says, I've got to ask him if he would want to talk for a second on live TV like that. As a journalist, that's a big thing. There's the other part of you that knows that that his handlers, the media relations folks with the Texans and so on, have a certain schedule and a certain protocol, and you don't just go get David Carr one-on-one. Well, the side of me that wanted to talk to him won out in the moment over the side that knew I might have some issues. Of course, David Carr, nicest guy in the world, is like, oh, sure. So all I did was ask him a question, at the end of this live report. I'm like, hey, look who's standing next to me coming off the field. David, how do you feel about blah, blah, blah? And we go through this. And by the time we're done, which is just like less than a minute, I've got the entire media relations Texans team gathered. Hitting around the camera like in a semicircle. And I'm like, all right, time to face the tidal wave. So I thanked David, and then I took the heat, and it was fine. We patched it up. I apologized, but the part of me that wanted that moment won out over the part of me that probably should have thought about my relationship with the team.
I don't know if I told you this story. My first Texans-Packers game period in Houston. I went as a fan. I was not just dating. I was living with my girlfriend who was a cheesehead. So much so that we had a shrine in our apartment, a table with the cheesehead, Brett Favre's signed biography. All his Packer paraphernalia. So she made me sit with the cheeseheads, which, I'm like, okay, if you want to pay, I'll sit with the cheeseheads. So she paid for the tickets. And then we went out tailgating with them before the game. And of course, I love Wisconsin people. I've been there a couple of times and they've always treated me great, but I wasn't excited about being stuck with the Packers fans as a Texan fan. That was the one problem with the whole situation.
You get, the good news is there's a certain mutual love of the game and a mutual love of tailgating and all the stuff that attaches to that. But yeah, when you're on the opposite side of it, you're going to listen to a lot of, they're passionate fan base. So you're going to listen to a lot of that passion during the game. It's fun. By the way, you notice I'm in a hoodie. It's the middle of October, and in Texas, obviously it's just extended summer basically there. But
it got down to 50 last night. We had our first cold front come through here. This is like a blizzard coming through Houston, in October.
50 degrees. Oh, that people are breaking out like multi. Okay. So I don't feel out of place here because it happened here. We got, I think last night we were at 39. And now during the day, it's fine. Like we're in the 60s here during the day, but I'm getting used to this because this is what I'm going to be wearing for, the next month or two before you really start putting on the layers, before the bad stuff starts coming.
Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit about that later on, but man, this is one of the NFL matchups of the week. The Packers and the Texans. Nance and Romo calling the game. Stroud versus Jordan Love, of course. How has Love looked since coming back from the early injury, and has Love picked up where he left off last year?
That's a good way to phrase that, because the Jordan Love of the first half of last year and the Jordan Love down the stretch and into the playoffs were two different quarterbacks. That switch that flipped to on switched somewhere in that middle of the season last year, and he was a strong quarterback and a difference maker in the playoffs when the Packers won a playoff game and then gave San Francisco all they could handle in that second round. He's closer to that guy. Obviously, with him, the biggest story was that first game of the season down in Brazil. And I got to tell you, there are a lot of people who criticized a lot of things about the Brazil game. The marketing of it makes a ton of sense for the league, but for the individual players, there was a lot going on there that did not play in their favor. And one of them was the grass. There was a lot of slipping and falling. It's a soccer field. Love had his knee injury there. And at the moment, you didn't know, right? It could have been season ending. It could have been 8 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever. He missed a couple of weeks, and he wasn't himself when he first came back, especially in terms of scrambling. But I think this last game, the one against Arizona this past Sunday, was when you first saw Jordan Love think to himself in the middle of a play when the options are gone and there's space in front of him, that there wasn't hesitation to run and get the first down, that he was not afraid to, if he had to slide, if he had to take somebody on, he would do it. He actually went out and threw a block for, it wasn't Jacobs, it's one of the running backs, so running right side, and Love ran in front of him. And I mean, it was more of a shove than a block, but come on, for a quarterback, that was a big thing. So this Love is much closer to last year's Jordan Love, second half Jordan Love. And the biggest thing is spreading options around the field, because the receiving core is still young, but there's enough talent there, and he's done enough of a job developing relationships all the way up and down the roster with the receivers that's what makes him dangerous. They don't have a top 5 wide receiver in the game. They don't have an old Devontae Adams, but they've got a whole bunch of options that can be difficult for a defense to cover. So it's quantity over quality.
You just missed Brett Favre, but you saw a lot of Aaron Rodgers. How does he compare to Jordan Love, and where do you think Jordan Love fit in as far as the NFL's elite right now?
In this moment, well, I'll go to the Rodgers part first, because Jordan Love was drafted in 2020. It was a very similar situation to when Rodgers was drafted in 2005. And it was interesting with that first couple of years when Love was the understudy were just like the first couple of years when Rodgers was the understudy. When you're talking about passing along that gauntlet, what Rodgers was, what I learned in my time working in media in Wisconsin covering the Packers, was that first of all, the relationship between Rodgers and Favre was acrimonious. It was not a good relationship for a chunk of the time, because Rodgers is the kid coming to take Favre's job, and Favre knows it's a matter of time. Rodgers did his best in his career to try to not do the same things Brett Favre did. I don't know if you ever would notice this, but on Wednesdays in Green Bay, the quarterback would speak. They're available to the media once a week. Here it was on Wednesday. Aaron Rodgers never spoke in the media auditorium, at least not in the regular season, on a Wednesday. He was always at his locker, because he thought that Favre going to the podium on Wednesday away from the locker room was not a good show toward his teammates. And Rodgers wanted to have a good show toward his teammates, to be standing at his locker the same way anybody else does. Problem is, Rodgers is going to be a circus to cover, and that's before any of the stuff of the last several years. He's just him. He's larger than life. So there are a million cameras at his locker. So the point of where I'm going is much of Rodgers' tenure was formed around his relationship with Favre. And then Jordan Love got drafted. And Rodgers all of a sudden was the guy, and he seemed a little surly, and he went through some issues and a holdout, and then he went to the podium in the preseason and listed off these names and these problems that he's had with the team, and stuff kind of separated from there. I think as much as Rodgers wanted to be different from Favre, the start of Love's career It's the same as the start of Rodgers' career, basically. They did get along much better. I get the sense that Rodgers and Love did get along well, but Love did a great job as an understudy. He spent all that time learning not just playbook stuff, but learning Rodgers' mentality, because I think, and I don't have the IQ test to prove this, but I think Rodgers is one of the smartest people I've ever been around in my life. Opinions on various issues aside, I think pure smarts, the amount of gray matter that's up there, Rodgers has a lot. And Love picked that up. He picked up the difference-making plays, the times when Rodgers would draw someone offside and get a free play out of it and gain 40 yards. Love has picked those things up. And so when he became a starter, it's helped Love, I think, start farther along, not just past the 2 years that he learned or 3 years that he learned from Rodgers, but just farther along than a lot of quarterbacks can get. I think he's farther in there. So taking that to the elite status stuff, Love still, to me, despite the years that he spent learning, is on a curve that reminds me of the way careers start for rookies and second-year players. Like, if you see receivers especially go through this, the third year seems to be this year where they make progress. It's not as cut and dried as it used to be. You have people that make a difference in the first couple of years. But this is second-year Love in my mind, despite the years where he was learning. And second-year Love is very good. So in terms of elite, I think that if he takes a step forward, he can arrive there, but it's not this year. It's going to be next year, and it may not even be the start of next year. It might just be halfway into it. He's got a chance, I think, to be long-term everything that Rodgers was here. That's a tall set of stats, obviously, to match, but I think he can do it.
What do the cheeseheads think about the Rodgers soap opera in New York?
Right now, they love it. Okay, so this is, I don't know if you know the story. This is a fantastic story. So Rodgers' first game with the Jets, there's a bar in Milwaukee that offers a deal that says if the Jets lose, you win. Basically, they pay for your bar tab. So the idea is they want people to come out and root against Rodgers. And that wasn't hard to do at that time, right? Because the orb that was the Rodgers situation just grew and grew and grew. And there was a point when the trade happened and it was a release more than anything. He's a legendary player, but people are like, okay, that's done. So they show up to the bar. And as you know, Rodgers gets hurt 4 plays in. And so the bubble is burst, right? Because now all you're doing is rooting against the Jets. Who cares, right? Like, if there's no Rodgers, these people don't care. They're drinking anyway. It's Wisconsin. So they drink all the game. We have a reporter, CBS 58 has a reporter live at this bar as this game is ending. It went to overtime as this game is ending. So he's on camera, and then there's video and stuff where he's off camera. When he's on camera the first time, the Jets are losing. And there's a lot of very happy buzz around him. It's that bar scene, that live bar scene. While he's under video, the Jets run a kickback to win the game. And all those bar tabs that were supposed to be paid for, now these guys have to pay. They come back live, and the stunned looks on the faces behind him are incredible. It's some of my favorite video that I have ever seen in Milwaukee. Just no noise in the bar, and everybody's just like, what happened? And that to me was great. But that describes I think the relationship. I think the last couple of years were a bit of a burden for the folks here. And you could excuse a lot of it because Rodgers was such an elite performer. But, man, it just, like I said, that thing grew so big that for all sides, it was probably time for a change. Rodgers will always be remembered as a legend, but there's still a little chunk of, bitterness, kind of like there was with Favre.
What does it feel like to be considered a legit Super Bowl contender and tied for dead last in your division? We don't understand these type of problems here in the AFC South.
How is it? Well, and there's some sort of historical thing, right? That through 6 games, everybody in the division has this, it's the best record for a division in total through 6 games. I don't really understand how it is that's happening. Schedule, 6 games can be a small sample size from a schedule standpoint. And I think maybe there have been some weak opponents because the Packers played the Colts and Titans back to back. And I'm like, I wasn't impressed with either of them. I thought the Colts run defense was terrible and the Titans just didn't seem to have it together. So it may be part of that, right? That a lot of these NFC North teams have played these common opponents and it's happened that way. I think it does shake out a little bit. And by the way, where I am in Milwaukee, you're less than an hour across the border from Chicago. So you have Bears fans even here in town, but especially south of here. They are screaming that they have the same record as the Packers, but they aren't getting the recognition that the Packers are getting. And the difference is, man, look, Caleb Williams will get there, but it's not the same. You don't have the same talent base. You don't have the same, recent history. There's still a lot of ways to go, but it is super bizarre that like you say, in the conference, they've got to be considered one of the teams. They've got enough talent certainly to go deep into January in the playoffs, but winning their division could be a struggle. The Lions, even post Aiden Hutchinson, are still a legitimate team. And I don't know what Sam Darnold is drinking in Minneapolis, but I just ordered a case of it because that dude has been phenomenal.
You don't have to tell Texans fans about him. Yeah, no, he's incredible right now. And I want to get to some key matchups Sunday, but just a quick reminder to our audience to join us for our live Texans-Packers post-game show right after Sunday's game. We need your comments and questions. We do it every week. And of course, for this show and all our content, give us your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Click the like button to support us. And if you haven't done so, click the subscribe and notifications on YouTube so you know when we upload our new content. Subscribe on your favorite podcast app also so you can listen to us while you're out and about. All right, Kevin, let's move to the key matchups. And where do you think the Packers can exploit the Texans? Because I'd say there's major concern right here about the linebacking core. The two starters, Azeez Al-Shire and Henry To'oTo'o, may not play, and the Packers, I noticed, are second in the NFL in rushing yards per game. That's a concern.
And the thing is, Matt LaFleur for years has wanted to run the kind of offense that they were running in San Francisco 4 or 5 years ago. You're talking, back in the era of, Raheem Mostert, his heyday, that sort of thing. San Francisco had rushing options the way that a lot of teams have passing options. And that's where I think they wanted, the Packers wanted this to be. And they've run the ball well because they've got some options running it. But what they have is Jacobs, has been around for a long time and, is still got enough in the legs. He's still young enough that he can be the main guy, the bellwether. But they've got these other guys behind that can run the ball well. But the other thing they have that's interesting to me is Jayden Reed. And when you're talking about rushing yards and that matchup of a running game against a linebacker core, obviously there's that power aspect to it. But what throws teams off when they face the Packers are these end arounds with Jayden Reed, who is a receiver, but he's also a dog. He's just a guy that he, you catch him on this end around and he hits that corner and goes. That's where these chunks of yardage can come. Obviously, they go into books as rushing yards, but Reed is what he is really, is a speedy receiver who can find a specific spot. But they're creative, and that the Packers are, and that is what has caused problems for teams. They had a first down with Tucker Kraft last week, the tight end, basically rushing in and then going right over center, taking the snap and going, just right over the marker for a first down. The Packers would like to be able to do that. This is not going to be a cold enough game that they have to establish the run game, but Matt LaFleur's offense really does feature the run enough that it'll open things up for Jordan Love. So that I think that's a legitimate thing, that you've got to watch Jacobs, you've got to watch who's behind him, and you got to pay attention to Jayden Reed. He's a tough one.
The Texans' number 2 cornerback, Kamari Lassiter, just was named officially out for more than a few weeks or more than a couple of games, and definitely is not going to play this game. Starting safety Jimmy Ward won't play this week for the Texans. They both missed last week, but it didn't matter, of course, as much with a rookie quarterback. How do you feel about the Packers O-line against the Texans front seven? Because if they handle that, it could be a bad situation for the Texans defense.
Yeah, it's so the Packers offensive line, and they haven't really, you haven't heard much about them this year because of the success they've had in the run game. I suppose this isn't around the league, but it's a fairly thin group. It's a good group, but it's a thin group. So Josh Myers went down late in the Arizona game with an injury. And if you lose just one along that line, I think you run into some trouble. There's talent there across the board, but not too deep talent across the board. There's a lot of shifting and that sort of thing. The biggest thing that's happened in Green Bay in the last couple of years is taking these talented players along the offensive line and shifting them from a position standpoint so you can get maximum talent out there. Elton Jenkins was an example who did some shifting back and forth, guard to tackle. And it's a good group, but again, if it's not one of those things, if the Packers overemphasize it early, if they overwork their offensive line early, and those guys are gassed later in the game, if you're using them enough that there's an issue with them later in the game, I think it could flip. I don't know if they can be effective if they want to road grade for 4 quarters. But at the beginning of it, at least with that starting offensive line healthy, I think the advantage certainly goes in their direction there. I just don't know if it's that way for 4 quarters.
From a Packers perspective, what concerns you the most about the Texans on either side of the football?
The Packers still, no matter what they could do, no matter what they've tried with different coordinators, have struggled on the defensive side of the ball, and they have gotten gashed on the defensive side of the ball. And look, Stroud is, I mean, you know, I don't have to say a word. You've seen everything from Stroud from day one. That's pure talent right there. That's a guy that this defense is going to have to contend with. And there is talent on the Packers defense in the secondary, but there's also a bit of a concern, and I don't know that they have faced someone of this caliber to this point. The Packers have been off to a good start, but you know, they've faced, you know, some questionable quarterbacks along the way. That's not going to be the case here with Stroud. They're really going to be tested. Jair Alexander is a curious case. He is supposed to be the leader of the Packers secondary, one of the leaders of the defense, and Jair has the big contract and so on. And Jair likes to talk, but there's been something off with him going back to last year. There've been a couple of disciplinary type issues. There was a game in Carolina late last year, and Jair's from that area, where Jair went to midfield with the team for the coin toss as a captain, but he wasn't named a captain. He did that on his own. And I know that was so obscure and bizarre, but the point is that gives you a little bit of insight into the person on top of the player. Jair's talented, but there's a lot of this, a lot of talk, but there's a lot of him getting burned too. And I don't know how they line up necessarily behind him. You know, guys like Robert Rochelle will help out. They signed Xavier McKinney from the Giants in the offseason. McKinney has been a monster through the first handful of games. He's a pick a game right now, and that's not going to last. He's a talented player, but it won't last. So my biggest concern would be one of those days with Jeff Hafley, the new defensive coordinator, one of those days where the secondary just can't stop Stroud and his receiving core. That's entirely possible, because I just, like I said, I just don't think they faced anyone of that caliber in the first handful of games of the season.
Matt LaFleur was on the Texans coaching staff in 08-09. So he was there when D'Amico was playing and coached alongside Kyle Shanahan, Robert Saleh, and Mike McDaniel on that staff. Have you heard him talk about that time or working with any of them?
Very, very fond memories in his case. You can get Matt LaFleur to talk about it. You know, if you're in a room and he's at the podium and you mention it, he definitely has fond memories of it. His mindset, his mentality goes back to working with the Shanahans and you know, just the way he ran from this coaching tree, his spot on this coaching tree. He is very loyal to that coaching tree, and it's influenced what he's done. And I think LaFleur is an interesting departure from the Packers' previous coach, Mike McCarthy. And we're talking about 6 years at this point. You know, LaFleur took over in 2019. But part of why he was there, part of it was the creative mind on offense, but part of it was LaFleur's relationship with players. You relate to players in different ways. And coaches, you know, Tom Coughlin's on the one end, right? And then, you know, you have guys on the other end that can be, you know, not too soft, but maybe, you know, too personal with the players or whatever. LaFleur is very much a players type of coach. There is very much an emotional connection that he develops with these guys. And I think he brings some things out. And I think that goes back to his days, you know, throughout the tree, Houston being one of those spots where I think he understood that coaches will go X's and O's all day, but you have to be able to relate to the players. Romeo Doubs, Packers receiver, missed a couple of days of practice last week. And there was some word that he was unhappy with his role, that he wasn't catching enough. It might have been 2 weeks back, and he missed a game because of it. And LaFleur never threw him under the bus. He said, look, we'll deal with this, but he made sure that people knew he was, in Dobbs's corner. He was rooting for him. He was trying to make sure that Dobbs would get back and be good, not just because it helps the team, but because it helps the player. Dobbs came back and caught 2 touchdowns last week. So the personal aspect of it for LaFleur is as big for me as the other parts of the coaching tree.
Let's go to the matchup for a second, because the Texans are 1-4 in the Packers series, 1-1 at Lambeau. When the schedule came out, I immediately thought the Texans might have caught a break, that this game was mid-October. The forecast looks perfect too. And by the way, you're a Georgia kid who spent your early career in Mississippi, Texas, and Florida. How do you handle the winters in Lambeau?
You don't. People say you get used to it, That has never happened, not once. I mean, obviously they handle the conditions differently, in that you've got salt trucks and plows, and there's a plan. When it snows heavily, life goes on, and that's okay. But in terms of me, like, there's no point where I've thought in January when it's 5 degrees or 5 below, you know what, I'll be fine. Let me just walk down to the store and grab something. I go by the Southern philosophy of I go inside until it goes away. And what that means is I'm inside for about 4 months a year. But when you handle this at Lambeau, you don't understand it until you experience it, how it affects the different parts of your life. Texas heat does the same, right? Like that when it's 108 in August and all the humidity in the world, and drinking Gatorade, drinking sports drinks is a different animal, and that happens here. There are a couple of things that change if you're not used to experiencing it. One, you don't realize how dry it is when you're dealing with temperatures that are that cold. You're also dealing with conditions that are super, super, super dry, and it affects. I mean, skin is one thing, right? But it can affect you in the course of a game. It can affect how you breathe, how you operate. Just those super, super dry conditions, basically like desert dry. That part is very strange to me. The traction on a field at Lambeau is not bad. They know how to deal with that with the grass that they have installed there. They can keep it heated enough where it's not a problem for the game. But then you have things that don't function, and there's the other half of it. Those iPads that everybody uses on the sideline.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Those iPads don't work. Like I've had cell phones be at 70% standing outside on the field at Lambeau and just die, like right on the spot. And so technology can be affected. There's a whole bunch of stuff that changes, not just because, oh my goodness, it's cold and you can see your breath, but it has an actual physiological effect on things and an effect on technology.
We might have some Texans fans that are going to the game. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you go into the concourse and they've got it set up where it's pretty warm in the concourse, as opposed to, like out in the stand. For an open air stadium, the concourse is not bad, right?
Two things that you'll want to know if you're going to Lambeau Field. That concourse is not 100% covered, but mostly covered, meaning it's fairly tight, but you have something over you and you have something on either side of you really going around. There's not a lot of open air in there. And that's what keeps it warm, is the body heat, honestly. All those fans that are going through the concourse. And so you can go there to get out of wind and grab a hot chocolate and whatever else they put in the hot chocolate, that's but the field, the actual bowl is completely 100% bleacher, the first 60 rows. Now that the stuff they've added through the years at the upper levels, those are actual seats. Everything below is bleacher. And it's an easy reason. It's because of snow removal. Part of the tradition of living in Green Bay is several times a year, especially on game weeks, they will send out requests for volunteers. And you do get paid some. It's not a free thing, but you shovel. You literally go in and shovel section 119, you're there shoveling out 60 rows of snow. You can't do that with seats. It's impossible. So to this day, it's all bleachers down there, and it affects the game experience because, hey, bleachers are great for snow removal, but guess what? Bleachers are cold, and they especially cold if the temperature is cold. It's a wonderful experience. One of my favorite in sports because it's so unique. But those two things are to be noted. Get to the concourse. I mean, it won't be that bad this Sunday, but if it's super cold, get to the concourse, get your hot chocolate, but be prepared when you sit down because it could be cold.
They're favored by 2.5. The Packers are. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, maybe. What they did against Arizona last week was impressive, and I thought that might result in a little bit more of an advantage at home. I mean, you figure your 3 is normally your spot of advantage. I think the odds makers think that, kind of like I was saying before, that Houston is a different caliber of opponent. They're not Indy or Tennessee or Arizona, and the Packers have played some easy games in this first 6 of the year. I think the Houston's they're at that point where home or road, they're going to be a legitimate threat to someone. And in the case of the Packers, it could easily be that way. Injuries could change it, but even with a healthy Jordan Love, this is no cinch for the home team. Like, this is going to be a different quality of opponent.
Man, I can't let you go without talking about how we got to know each other. I worked for the CBS sports department in Memphis. You worked for the ABC in Tupelo. So we both covered Ole Miss football and basketball. Do you have a favorite story or two from that time? Because my favorite part of the job back then was going to Oxford covering Ole Miss, just a hell of a fan atmosphere. And I've experienced game days at Tennessee, Arkansas, and Kyle Field. I'll take Oxford, the Grove, and all that any day of the week.
If you don't call it one of the best experiences in the country, then you haven't experienced it. And you and I have, and there's no doubt that we both feel it the same way about it. And those times in Tupelo, obviously it was a lot of years ago, and I was a young dude and a spry dude, and wanted to hit 500-foot home runs with everything we were doing. But the one that stands out to me is the first 7 overtime game in college football history. Because now with the new rules, it's happened a few times, but this was the first time. This was Ole Miss, Arkansas. This was 2001. And I was missing out on my high school reunion that night to cover this game. But that's what you do, right? Like, it's, unfortunately, some of the life events, if they overlap, you got to work. Like, there's no question about it. Well, I think this game might have started at 6. The 10 o'clock newscast is underway, and they're still going. And we have to figure out, okay, they want you to do something live. Obviously, you can't do it inside the stadium during a live broadcast. That's frowned upon. You can get in trouble for that. So you have to run out of the stadium to do something live. But the game is going on. So we had one camera there. This camera shooting the game. It's shooting with some of the most historic stuff that Ole Miss football had seen at that point in decades. But also you had to be outside. So my photographer and I were in a little bit of a spat about exactly how we wanted to handle this. She wanted to stay out and make sure we were live. And I said, I don't want to miss, something special happening inside the building. That's not that special of a story until I tell you the other half, that the photographer is now my wife.
Oh man. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That was such a fun place just because there was some scenery, as a single guy, it was fun to go there because you got to watch all the scenery at Ole Miss. But yeah, it was also the atmosphere, and it just, it was everything you'd want from the SEC. And boy, the campus, one of the prettiest campuses in the country, if not the prettiest, and just the whole 9 yards. And yeah, just so good to catch up with you. By the way, he's at 321Q Kevin on X. If you want to maybe reach out or follow him or ask him a question about the Packers. Just can't wait for Sunday. Thanks for the time, brother.
Robert, always appreciate it, man. Great to talk sports with you anytime. I'm ready anytime.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.